They say betrayal hurts the most when it comes from those you love. But what if it comes from the one who shares your blood and wears the dress meant for your future?
Before I begin, if stories like this stir something in you, don't forget to subscribe to Reddit Family Tales. Tap the bell, hit the like button, and share your thoughts in the comments. You're not alone, and neither am I. My name is Elisa, and for most of my life, I've been the invisible daughter.
Not because I didn't try. I tried so hard it hurts to remember. I tried to be the calm one, the helpful one, the one who never made too much noise, who cleaned up quietly after dinners, who listened when others spoke over me, and who clapped for my sister even when she forgot my birthday 3 years in a row. I wasn't born invisible. I was made that way piece by piece by the slow erosion of being overlooked. My mother always said Vivian just had more presence, more charm, more needs, that I was the easy one, easy to forget, easy to silence.
I remember one Christmas, I had saved up to buy Mom a beautiful set of ceramic baking dishes. Vivian handed her a cheap scarf with sparkles still tagged. Mom cried at Vivian's thoughtfulness and never even unwrapped mine. It sounds petty, I know. It sounds like I'm keeping score. But I kept those little scores not out of bitterness, but survival. I needed to remind myself I wasn't imagining it. I moved out at 22 and built a small, quiet life for myself. I started designing wedding dresses mostly for friends at first. I worked in the corner of a shared studio, hand-stitching lace late into the night, barely affording rent. But it was mine. It was mine. No one from my family ever visited. Not once. Not even when I launched my first real collection, the one that got a small write-up in a local bridal magazine. I left a copy at home on the kitchen table when I came by that Thanksgiving. It was gone by the next morning, tossed out with the cranberry sauce no one ate. Vivian, of course, went into PR. She had a podcast, a sponsored Instagram, a boyfriend with perfect teeth and perfect blandness. I met him once briefly. His name was Aaron. I didn't think much of him then. It wasn't until 3 years later, when I met Daniel, that things started to shift inside me. Daniel was different. He was warm-grounded. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He didn't try to fix me or offer advice when I vented. He just sat beside me and held space. With him, I felt seen in a way I didn't know I was starving for. We got engaged quietly under the sycamore tree in the park I used to walk through as a child. No grand gestures. Just a ring, his trembling hands, and a question I had dreamt of hearing but never believed would be mine. And so I did the one thing I had been waiting my whole life to do. I began designing my own dress. Not for a client, not for a trend. For me, a soft ivory satin with hand-sewn pearls that caught the light just so not too much. Just enough. A neckline that followed the collarbone where he always kissed me first. A waistline that reminded me I had shaped myself not for anyone else, but in spite of everyone else. I kept it hidden in my studio. No one had seen it, not even Daniel. I wanted it to be a moment, a reveal of all I had built in silence. But silence is a strange thing. Sometimes it protects you. Sometimes it's the weapon they use against you. And sometimes it's what they assume you'll keep forever. I think I always knew my mother loved Vivian more. She never said it outright, but love doesn't always need words. Sometimes it's in the way a plate is set down, who gets the larger serving of mashed potatoes, or who gets asked how their day was. It's in the way one daughter gets to cry and be comforted, while the other is told to be strong and not make a scene. Vivian was the golden one, the hurricane. The one everyone watched even when she was careless, selfish, or cruel. Especially then. Me, I was the peacekeeper, the background music, the one who picked up the pieces and never asked why they were dropped in the first place. There was a time I thought it was my fault. That maybe I wasn't interesting enough or warm enough. That maybe if I wore brighter clothes or spoke a little louder, someone would notice. But by the time I turned 30, I stopped trying to earn what should have never needed earning. I kept my distance. I called on holidays. I sent polite gifts. I listened to updates about Vivian's latest trip or brand collaboration or whatever cause she had temporarily latched onto. I even smiled when they called her a star. They never asked about my work. Never asked about the women who cried when they first saw themselves in my gowns. Never noticed how I had grown a business from nothing. I stopped expecting them to. But I let them in again when I got engaged. It was foolish, I know. But some small, unkillable part of me wanted to share the moment. I sent a group message with a photo of Daniel and me at the park. Just a simple shot. He had his arm around me. I was crying. Happy tears. Honest tears. No one replied that night. The next morning, my father sent a thumbs-up emoji. My mother texted congrats. Vivian didn't answer at all. It stung. I waited. I told myself she was probably busy. I checked my phone more than I'd like to admit. 3 days later, she posted a selfie from a rooftop party with the caption, "Some people get rings, I get views." I didn't respond. What would I have said? Daniel noticed. He always noticed. He asked if I was okay, and I smiled too quickly, saying it was just old family stuff. But I think something shifted in him that day, not love, not doubt. Just awareness that the woman he chose carried wounds she never showed. I remember the first time I showed him a sketch of the dress. His face softened, and he said, "That's you. Simple, bold, unapologetic." I felt beautiful. Not because of how I looked, but because someone finally saw what I had sewn into every stitch myself. I didn't invite many people to our engagement dinner. Just close friends, a few clients turned confidants, and of course my family. Even Vivian. Part of me hoped she'd surprise me. That maybe just once she'd look at me without competition in her eyes. That she'd show up as a sister, not a rival. The dinner was set at a quiet little restaurant tucked into a corner of the city. Intimate. Candlelit. I wore a soft dove gray dress and a necklace Daniel had given me when we first said I love you. He was already inside when I arrived. I remember pushing open the door, my heart light, my smile ready. And then I froze. There, seated at the head of the long table, laughing, sparkling, radiant, was Vivian, wearing my dress, the engagement dress, the one I had hidden, the one no one was supposed to know about. The neckline curved exactly as I had drawn it. The pearl detailing shimmered under the candlelight. The back, I designed it to dip gently right where my spine curved in. She even wore her hair up the way I had imagined mine. And beside her, leaning in close, a hand on the small of her back, was Daniel. I stood there just inside the doorway, and for a moment, the world didn't move. The flicker of candlelight blurred at the edges of my vision. The music, the laughter, the clinking of forks against porcelain, all of it melted into a distant hum like I was underwater. Daniel was the first to notice me. He didn't flinch. Didn't look guilty. He simply smiled casual, as if he'd bumped into an old acquaintance in line for coffee. And then Vivian turned. Her eyes swept over me like a stranger's would, slowly appraising without a hint of recognition. Then she smiled too. That rehearsed, camera-ready smile she used when brand sponsors were in the room. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She was wearing my dress, not a copy, not something inspired by it. My dress? The one I had designed, hidden, protected. It fit her like a second skin, the pearl beading, tracing the curve of her collarbone exactly as I'd envisioned for myself. The hem kissed the floor. Her hair was swept into a loose chignon, just like in my original sketches. I felt suddenly exposed, as if someone had stolen a piece of me and was parading it around like a trophy. Someone, I think it was one of Daniel's co-workers, stood and gestured toward an empty seat near them. "You made it. Here, sit by the bride and groom."
I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was years of being silenced. Maybe it was the thudding pulse in my chest so loud it drowned out fear. Maybe it was the quiet woman in me finally deciding she didn't want to vanish again.
I walked toward them. My heels clicked across the wood like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. And then I sat, right between them. The entire table quieted. I folded my hands gently on the tablecloth and smiled not out of politeness, but control. "Nice dress," I said, my voice even warm, almost affectionate. "It looks better in motion than on the mannequin." Vivian's smile faltered. Just slightly, but she caught herself and laughed too loudly. "Oh, this, just something I found lying around. You know how I am with vintage pieces." Daniel stayed silent. He sipped his wine like it was any other night. I could smell the faint citrus of his aftershave, the one I'd picked out. I turned to him. "Where did you two meet up today?" He blinked. "We bumped into each other a couple of weeks ago, at a gallery opening." I nodded. Must have been fate. Or family.
The word family tasted bitter, but I held it.
The others at the table shifted uncomfortably, sensing something off. Vivian leaned in, dropping her voice low-sharp like a whisper meant to cut. "I didn't think you'd actually come." I leaned back just slightly. Neither did I. And then I reached into my purse. My hands didn't shake. Not even a little. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. The screen lit up with a grainy black and white video. The footage showed the interior of my design studio. The date was 3 weeks ago. The time, 11:42 p.m. It showed Vivian slipping through the side door, the one with the faulty lock. She was alone. She wore gloves. She walked straight to the garment rack flipped through hangers until she found it. She held up the dress, turned it toward the light, and smiled. Then she folded it over her arm and walked out. The room went still. A fork slipped from someone's hand and clattered onto a plate. No one moved to pick it up. Vivian's voice came out tight. "You set me up." I looked her in the eye. "No, I protected my work. What you did was your choice." Daniel opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it. His hand slowly slipped from the back of her chair. I stood. "You can keep the dress, Vivian," I said softly, adjusting the strap of my bag. "But you'll never wear it again without remembering what it really was. Not just fabric and pearls, but trust, and love, and silence." I didn't wait for a response. I walked out, heels clicking like punctuation, and behind me, not a single person called my name. The night air wrapped around me like an old shawl, cool, familiar, and oddly comforting. I didn't cry. I didn't run. I just walked slow and steady down the quiet street lined with flickering lamplight. My hands were still warm from the heat of the confrontation, but my heart was oddly still. I had imagined this moment so many times in my head, though never quite like that. Sometimes I pictured myself screaming, flipping a wine glass, storming out in tears. Other times, I saw myself walking away with dramatic flair, like some heroine in a movie. But the way it happened, calm, quiet, undeniable, felt more powerful than any performance ever could. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I walked to the park. The same park where Daniel proposed, where we carved our initials into the old sycamore tree near the west path. I stood there, in the dark, running my fingers over the bark, tracing the faint E+D, like it was someone else's memory. Maybe it was. I stayed there until my phone buzzed. A message. From my mother. Just 4 words. "What did you do?" I stared at the screen, lips tightening. Not "Are you okay?" Not "Come home." Not even "I'm sorry." Just blame. Default mode.
Another message followed from Vivian, a longer one, rambling, defensive, accusing me of humiliating her in front of Daniel's colleagues, of making her look like a thief.
I didn't reply. The next day, silence. Not one call from Daniel. No knock on my door. No explanation. Not even an apology. And strangely, that hurt less than I expected. Maybe because deep down I knew he was never mine to begin with. Maybe because a man who could sit beside betrayal and not even flinch had already chosen his side long before I showed up at that table. The fallout rippled quickly. Clients who had once raved about Vivian's branding genius quietly unfollowed her online. Her latest partnership, some skincare brand, pulled their promotion campaign without warning. Someone had posted a clipped version of the video from the dinner, just the part where the footage played, and the room went silent. It had no names, no tags. But people can sense truth. I never shared it myself. Didn't need to. The universe has a way of echoing honesty when it's finally spoken aloud.
I spent the next few weeks rebuilding my studio, reorganizing bolts of fabric, deleting half-done sketches of dresses meant for a wedding that would never be. I cleaned the mirror where I used to hold my breath and imagine myself walking down the aisle.
And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I designed something new just for me. Not a gown, not a dress, a jacket.
It was structured, soft, powerful. Pearl stitch accents at the cuffs, hidden silk lining, a quiet reminder of who I was and who I refused to be again.
A month later, an old client, one I adored, messaged me. She had a friend who had just canceled her wedding after discovering her fiancé was cheating. The friend wanted a dress for a different kind of ceremony, not a wedding, but a celebration of starting over. I told her the client said, "You're the only one who could make something like that feel like power." I accepted the job, and with it came an idea.
What if there was a place, a space where women like me, like her, like so many others I'd met quietly over the years, could come and feel seen, not pitied, not erased, not laughed at for taking too long to move on, just seen.
So I renamed my studio. Not yours. No fanfare, no press release, just a new brass plaque on the door and a small handwritten card in the window. For every woman who ever lost something that was never hers to begin with, welcome. I didn't know it then, but that small shift would change everything. It's strange, the kind of peace that follows a storm like that. Not loud, not victorious, just still. Like the world stops asking you to pretend. Like your lungs finally remember how to breathe without bracing first. That's how it felt in the weeks after I opened Not Yours. Clients began to trickle in, not because of advertising, but because of whispers. One woman came in with a crumpled invitation to her ex-husband's third wedding. She wanted a dress that said, "I'm not broken." Another brought the ashes of the dress she'd burned after calling off an engagement, asking if I could turn it into something wearable, something soft. We sat together in that small studio with its creaky floors and coffee-scented air, and we told each other the kind of truths we used to hide in our throats, the kind of stories you only share when you know the person across from you won't ask you to smile through it. And I listened. Not as a designer, as a woman who had also worn silence like a second skin. One morning, as I was stitching a bodice in the back room, a package arrived. No return address, just my name in familiar handwriting, neat soft curves. My mother's. Inside was a box, and in the box, my old childhood scrapbook. The one I used to keep under my bed. Tucked between 2 pages was a note written in the same hand. "You were never invisible. I just didn't know how to see you." It was not an apology, but it was something. Still, I didn't call her. I didn't return the box. Some bridges need to stay exactly where they are, not burned, not rebuilt. Just quiet. As for Vivian, the world didn't end for her. She posted less, traveled more. Her name faded from the press kits and influencer events. The last I heard, she moved to a smaller city and started offering personal branding workshops. I didn't follow up.
I didn't need to.
Daniel, for his part, never tried to contact me again. Maybe he knew there was nothing left to explain. Or maybe he simply wasn't the man I thought he was, and I had loved only the version of him I wanted to believe in. But I wasn't angry, not anymore. One day, I opened the studio early. It was raining outside, not a hard storm, but the kind of gentle drizzle that made everything feel soft and distant. I made a pot of tea, wrapped myself in an old cardigan, and sat by the window watching the drops trace slow paths down the glass. A young girl walked by soaked to the bone, clutching a dress in a plastic bag. I opened the door before she could knock. She looked startled. "Are you—" "I'm here," I said simply. "Come in." She stepped inside, dripping and shivering, and held out the bag. "I need to change everything. I can't wear this. Not anymore." I took the dress from her hands. The fabric was beautiful, but heavy with a weight it shouldn't carry. "Then we'll make something new," I said. She cried. Not loud. Just a quiet, broken sound, like something releasing after being held too long. I made her tea, sat with her, listened.
That's what we do now and not yours. We sit with the quiet. We stitch what was lost into something whole again. We begin. It took me a long time to understand that some victories arrive without applause. They don't come with spotlights or speeches. They come in quiet mornings when you no longer wake up dreading the day. In full cups of coffee that don't grow cold from being forgotten. In the absence of anger. A few months passed after that rainy morning with the girl and the ruined dress. The studio had grown into something more than I planned. Women came from places I'd never heard of, all for something that wasn't just a dress. They wanted to be reminded they still had worth, that their stories didn't end with betrayal. One of them, a woman in her 60s, whispered as I zipped up the back of her dress, "I stayed in silence for 30 years. This is the first thing I've worn that feels like me." I didn't reply. I just rested my hands gently on her shoulders, looked her in the mirror, and nodded. Sometimes words get in the way of truth. Around that time, I heard through a friend of a friend that Vivian had started calling herself a rebrand consultant. That she now told people she used to work in fashion until she got bored with it. That her follower count had dwindled and her name no longer opened doors. But what struck me wasn't her fall, it was how little it meant to me. The old me might have smiled at her descent, used it as proof that karma was real. But now I didn't need her to fall to know I had risen. Daniel, too, had faded into the background. I never saw him again, not in person. But once late at night, I found an old email in my spam folder. No subject, no message body. Just a single attachment, a photo of the sycamore tree, our initials still faintly etched in the bark. I stared at it for a long time, and then I deleted it. Because sometimes even memories don't deserve a second look. The most surprising part, my family never reached out after that. Not my father, not my mother. Not even when Not Yours got featured in a small lifestyle magazine. Not when one of my dresses made it into a gallery exhibition titled Resilience in Thread. Their silence, once a source of pain, became a strange kind of relief. I didn't need their praise. I no longer needed their permission to feel proud of what I'd built. What I did have was a small shelf in the studio filled with thank you notes from clients. A few dried flowers, a photograph of me smiling, tired, proud, standing next to one of my first brides, a woman who had walked away from a wedding that wasn't meant for her. Every so often, someone would ask if I regretted it, not marrying, not forgiving, not moving on. And I would smile gently and say I moved forward. That's enough. I don't think healing is ever loud. For me, it came softly like morning light through linen curtains, like the way tea steam curls in the quiet before the city wakes. It came in small, unnoticed ways. It came one Sunday when I opened the studio early, just to sit in the warm hush before appointments. The sky outside was pale gray, the kind that makes everything feel slower, softer. I wore my old wool cardigan, the sleeves too long, the elbows worn thin, and poured myself a cup of chamomile tea. No rush, no phone buzzing, just the steady rhythm of being alive and unbothered. And there in the corner of the shop was the chair I used to sit in while sketching dresses I thought no one would ever wear. Now it held a folded note from a client, an older woman with silver-streaked hair, who had brought me her mother's wedding dress to repurpose. The note read, "You helped me reclaim a part of myself I thought I buried with her. Thank you for seeing me." That word seeing stayed with me. So much of my life had been shaped by being unseen, overlooked, made to feel too quiet, too soft, too easy to leave behind. But now people came to me not despite those qualities, but because of them. They trusted me with their grief, their hope, their new beginnings, and I didn't need to speak loudly to hold them. That afternoon, after my last fitting, I walked back to the park. The same park where Daniel had once asked me to marry him. I hadn't returned since that night. The sycamore tree was still there, tall, weathered, patient. I stood beside it and ran my fingers along the bark. Our initials were faint now, nearly worn away by wind and rain. Time has a way of softening things, even the sharpest scars. I didn't cry. I didn't wish for things to be different. Instead, I sat on the nearby swing, the old wooden kind, with frayed ropes, and closed my eyes. The breeze carried the scent of leaves and distant rain. Children's laughter echoed faintly from the other side of the field. I let my feet sway gently above the grass. And in that moment, I wasn't the woman who had been betrayed. I wasn't the forgotten daughter or the abandoned fiancé.
I was just Elisa.
Whole, still, enough. Back at the studio, a small gold plaque now hangs by the entrance. People pass by it every day without noticing. But sometimes when the light hits just right, it glints softly. It reads,
"Not yours, but fully mine."
And that in the end is the only closure I ever needed.